Paper break a one dime, can I get a radio check? Pretty quiet out here on channel 19. Well, there's a plain white rapper taking pictures at the state line. Hit the jake brake quick, we ain't paying no fines. The driver swing into the interstate, body shop south at exit 5. Building trucking ain't the same as it was. We're the last of our kind.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Channel 19 Experience Trucker Podcast. I'm your host, Tony. Let's push the buttons in and get this rig rolling. It is episode number 1. And we've got a few topics to discuss today. Of course, why is this podcast even happening? What is it all about? Are a few of the things we'll unpack today. Why am I making this podcast? That's the question. Everybody from my wife all the way through my group of friends. Like, what are you doing? All right, so here's my why. I've been a truck driver, been an owner-operator. Over the last 15 years, I've done a number of different things in and out of the cab of a truck, working for trucking companies, working for shippers, working for almost anybody you can think of in the industry, technology. And the most fun out of all that is when I get to spend time with truck drivers. And so the further my career has gone as away from truck drivers, the more I miss it. Luckily, I've got a little brother trucker who keeps me connected to the road. And he's a fantastic truck driver, owner, operator, and brother. But I miss other truckers. And the other part of it that I missed was I found myself reminiscing about a particular thing about trucking that I missed the most. I started trucking I grew up in trucking. My stepdad was a truck driver, owner, operator, and small fleet owner over the years. And so I grew up washing windows as a little kid. When dad would come home, it would be about, the truck and his time home and cleaning the truck, wiping the mirrors down, peeling single state registration stickers off the side of the truck, putting new ones on because they were always coming at different times of the year, and having to update those on the side of the truck, greasing trucks, all that stuff. I grew up around trucking, and then I started driving for myself in the mid-90s. And as anybody who's been around for the mid-90s knows, it was a different world. This was pre-cell phones. This was pre-internet. Truck driving in the 90s was you left home with a wad of $100 bills, an atlas, and your wits, and your CB radio. And so I learned probably most of my education about truck driving the CB radio, and also from the people I met on the CB radio in person, whether that was broke down on the side of the road and hoping that somebody would show up who knew what the heck might be the problem, to guys that you ran with for hundreds of miles and had dinner with somewhere or not. And sometimes you never even saw them, but you spent a good part of a day of your life with them, finding out who they were and sharing who you were, killing time across the super slab out there. So all that being said, I decided to make a podcast. And let's face it, it's not going to take you long to figure out. I don't know what I'm doing. But it's been a lot of fun trying to figure out how to make a podcast. And what it made me think of during this whole experiment of trying to make a podcast is, and of course, when you're going to make a podcast, you have to ask yourself, okay, what are you going to talk about? And I didn't really know, other than I know this much, whether I was a dispatcher, whether I was a truck driver, whether I was working in the trucking industry in other fashions, truck drivers are the funniest group of people that I know in my life. And I knew that, if I can get a few of you to share your funny stories and we could talk about trucking, maybe we've got something here. So back to me having no idea what I'm doing, it reminded me, thinking of what I'm going to do in my first podcast, of the fact that my first truck driving job, even though I grew up in trucking, I had no idea what I was doing either. And that's what it made me decide. First podcast and some of the first interactions that I'd like to have with the audience are around your first truck driving job. How did you get it? What made you do it? What was it like that first day? I'll talk about my experience. We've got Danger Dave joining the podcast for an interview later on. He'll tell his stories about how he got into trucking. It's an adventure, and there's a lot of different ways to find yourself behind the steering wheel of a big truck. And every trucker has that story of how you ended up with your first job. Usually it's a bit of an adventure. There's funny stories that go along with it. Some are good, some are bad, some are sad. Some of them we may have to protect the names of everybody to protect the innocent, or to not share something with somebody's boss that they didn't hear before or don't know happened. Well, that's what this podcast is about. And that kind of leads me to why Channel 19 Experience? What's behind the name? What's this supposed to be about? And like I've alluded to a couple different times already, it's about the community. The world's changed. Channel 19 doesn't have much traffic on it these days. In the early 2000s, phones started showing up, which connected you as a truck driver more to other people. When you left your driveway in the 90s and before that period of time from whatever, the 60s to the 90s, when you left your driveway, Channel 19 was your best bet and to communicate with anybody. And so we had that community there. And while technology has changed over the years, from the first cell phones that connected you back to friends and loved ones and dispatchers, and as it's ramped up through all the various apps that tell you how to get to where you're going and where the truck stops are, and on to ELDs and in-cab devices, laptop computers, the experience has changed quite a bit. Each one of those tools, while it provides a benefit, stripped a little bit of the value of Channel 19 away from everybody, and that's why it's kind of died off. We've lost the connection with one another. I see it. I'm in a bunch of Facebook groups and other social media channels with truck drivers. And it's not really the forum to tell stories like you used to. And whether you're just listening to the stories, whether you're telling stories of your own, Channel 19, the bar and the diner at the truck stop, there were lots of ways to share your story or overhear other people's stories. Remember when there was phones at all the tables in the truck stops, and you got to overhear somebody berating their dispatcher or finding out bad news or having a strained conversation with their spouse or loved one. We were more connected to one another. So anyway, that's what Channel 19's experience is meant to be about. Having the community, sharing those stories, letting other people learn from our mistakes, our experiences, people feeling like you're not alone because you're not the only one who's went through some of this stuff. There's plenty of bravado in the trucking industry about all the ways people are the greatest truck driver in the world. But let's face facts, we've all had our moments of dopey decisions, forgotten routines, mistakes that we regret, and sharing them with one another can be a positive thing. And so let's do that. That's where we're headed with Channel 19. We've got all the social medias. We'll get the YouTube up. Share your post with everybody. Reach out to me if you want to talk on the channel. And happy to interview all of you. One of the other points I wanted to share in this first podcast was, and this will relate to my first truck driving job. My first truck driving job was around driving a straight truck, hauling agricultural products. So I grew up in Minnesota. In the summertime, there's peas to harvest, there's sweet corn to harvest, there's sugar beets to harvest, and then you get into the fall crops of corn and soybeans, all that stuff. But I started in pea season because it happens in the summertime, which is good timing because we don't have school. And the kids can go out and drive trucks and help haul the products off to the processing plants. So anyway, one of the farmers that we hauled sugar beets for my first year, he was one of those guys who had a pretty hard look about him. And, you're a kid, you don't want to screw around. Farmer, they earned their muscles the old-fashioned way. It wasn't with protein powder and weightlifting in a gym. It was work. And so you made sure that you minded your P's and Q's and did the right thing. And it was also back in an era where, if you did something too stupid, you might find yourself in the dust. So anyway, he was a great guy, great man, looked tough, was tough, but he shared something with me in that summer that sticks with me 30 some years later, which is he said, basically, and I'm paraphrasing because my memory's not that good, but he said, understand the entertainment value of things in your life. He was a guy who liked to joke and have fun. There was a time for business and there was a time for seriousness, but there was also a time to joke and understanding the entertainment value. So when I look back at This podcast, my hope is that at a minimum, I'm going to get some entertainment value. I know my brother and his buddies are going to get some entertainment value out of this. Hopefully you get some entertainment value out of it. Really, the fact that I'm connecting with family and friends more who are truck drivers, and the fact that I've already got people reaching out to share their experiences with me. I've already received more than I could have asked for, and that's a blessing in and of itself. So we'll continue that trend of finding the entertainment value in all this. We'll run some episodes and we'll get some laughs and see what happens. All right, so back to my first truck driving job. So it's always interesting to hear how somebody got their first truck driving job and what that experience was like. I'll talk a little bit more about it later with Danger Dave. But so my first truck driving job was with a farmer hauling peas. He had an ad in the paper. This was mid-90s, I guess early 90s, and looking for a truck driver. Now, like I said, I was in a truck driving family, pretty close-knit area out in the middle of nowhere. Everybody kind of knows everybody, even if you don't know them, you know of them, you know how they make their living, that sort of thing. So everybody knew what our family did, that we were in the trucking business. So I had a little bit of street cred that was largely unwarranted because my experience up until that point was mostly in first gear on the same plot of land and not much further than that. So anyway, I called him up on his home phone from my home phone. That's how times have changed. And I told him I'd come on over and if I got hired, I'd go to work. And so, of course, he asked me, do I have any driving experience? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And my last name gave me the street cred to play that off. As went over there with the hope that either A, he would not ask me to prove that I knew how to drive a truck, or he would be willing to show me enough to at least get me to the end of his about a mile-long driveway, and then he'd be crazy enough to trust me from there to figure it out. And so I showed up at his house. He looked me up and down. I looked like I had all the parts in the right places, and I at least knew how to put my shirt on the right direction, and I had a pair of pants on and a pair of work boots, so I might have a shot at this thing. So he says, "Okay, well, you're here. Can you start now?" I'm like, "Sure. Where's the truck?" And so he took me around inside the barn. So there she is. She was an old international cab over, like in the Facebook post. She was named Maranatha back when trucks had names and they were airbrush painted on the truck somewhere. This one was on the headliner above the windshields. And she had quite an interesting paint job. A lot of colors you don't see on a paint job today. And she was from mid, maybe early 70s. And he threw me the keys and said, the field that you're going to is about 5 miles south of town on the eastbound side of the road. And so I jumped in the truck and looked around and saw that most of the buttons didn't have labels on them, or if they did have labels, they were all worn off. And I fired up the truck. I figured out which button to push to start it. And I looked over at the shift lever, and there was an extra button that I didn't know what exactly that was going to be for, but I figured if I can make it to the end of the driveway and out of sight, then we'll just figure out what the rest of these switches do at some other point. So I put it in first gear, started rolling. I actually got shifted up a few gears without grinding too much of things, no loud clunk, so I didn't have to jam it in. And I made it far enough away from him that I could breathe a little sigh of relief, and I made it to the end of the driveway. In low range. Hopefully he thought I was being careful because he was watching and still standing there, probably wondering if he was ever going to see his truck again in the same condition. So I pull out of his driveway, I get on the main highway, and I make it up to fifth gear, and I go to flip the gear selector, and nothing. Grind. Off to the side of the road we go. Let's start over. Back up to fifth gear. Rinse, repeat, grind. Good thing he was about 2 miles from town, so I had a couple miles to figure this out. By the time I made it to town, I at least made it into high range, although there was a few angry settlers from the area who were not impressed with my 20 miles an hour down the U.S. highway. So anyway, made it through the field, got the first load, made it down the highway, figured out high range, drove my first shift, and all of a sudden now I'm a truck driver. Um, it's an experiment, right? I mean, some people are smart and they go like school and they get trained. That's not how you had to get a Class B license in Minnesota back then. Talk about it more later, but it's an adventure. No two trucks are alike. Well, there are models and makes that are alike. Just because you learned on one truck doesn't mean when you get thrown the keys to the next one that everything's going to feel right, and you're not going to look around scratching your head going, well, we'll just figure it out as you go. So, get comfortable with the idea of you're not going to know what you're doing for quite some time. And even then, you probably end up switching paths and what you're hauling, what you're doing, where you're going. And there's that kind of newness that keeps popping up even when you've been at it a while. Mostly I pulled vans, reefers. I had a little bit of a stint hauling a variety of stuff, rock trucks, cattle trucks, anhydrous ammonia. I had a tanker endorsement. And I played around with a bunch of stuff. Most of my over-the-road career was with reefers. We are the kings of the highway. Don't believe a thing my brother said. Flatbedders can't be trusted. They struggle to back up. We all know the jokes. But in all seriousness, there's a ton of skill to all these jobs, and everybody's had to learn them along the way. So let's welcome Danger Dave to the podcast. Danger Dave, where are you at today? Where are we talking to you from?
We're in Marshfield, Wisconsin.
Where's Marshfield in relation to like Madison?
Middle of nowhere. I'm straight west of Green Bay by probably about 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
Right in the middle.
Yeah, like up 39.
Just west of 39. Straight south of the best truck stop I think in the Midwest, Abbotsford. So you can get all the big dog bones and whatnot for your dogs. And I don't know, people are probably gonna think I'm nuts for thinking that that's a great truck stop. I don't know, but I like it.
We all got our thing, right?
Yeah, your little honey holes.
Well, this episode has been about, first time, first trucking jobs, how you got into trucking, what poor decision in your life where it treats you to the point you're at right now. And the stupid stuff that goes around with your first trucking experience, because it's all fun and games till somebody hands you the keys to their truck or you get the keys to your own truck. Or now it's pretty real. So how'd you get into trucking?
So I got into it accidentally. I was a heavy equipment operator. I joined the Army National Guard when I was 17. And I went down to Fort Leonard, Missouri, learned how to run all the equipment, dozers, road graders. One of the 2-week courses was tractor trailer, and you had to haul because we had to haul our own equipment as a combat engineer. The state of Minnesota, well, let's back up. I came back from advanced individual training, and my now wife, but at the time girlfriend, moved me out of my mom's house and into an apartment. So I'm like, I have no job. I have no source of income. And I went on a temp agency and became a janitor at a Catholic church. And I think I made it 3 weeks. And I was like, I got to do something else. And I was visiting my mom. My mom's works at a law firm, and right next door was the DMV where you do the testing and stuff. And I went in there and I just said, well, how do I get my CDL? And the guy goes, well, it all starts at the computer. So I went and I took my online course and stuff like that. And he goes, guy, you actually did really well. You didn't study or nothing? I said, no. In the Army, I had a tractor trailer school, and he goes, do you have a VMET, Verification of Education and Training form? And I said, I don't know what that is. He goes, Google it. He goes, I can't help you get it, but go Google it. So I did, printed it off, brought it in there. He looked at it, stamped my CDL and said, congratulations, you're a truck driver. But 30 minutes, I'm like, I don't have to do a road test or nothing. He goes, no, state of Minnesota, as long as you have a military ID or military driver's license, you're good. So I went home and I started like Googling driving jobs, or I kind of wanted to be in construction because that's what I was doing for the National Guard and the Army. And first construction company that popped up on the Google search, I clicked it, called them. They said, yeah, come on in. I started running dozers and stuff like that. And the owner walked up to me one day and said, hey man, you really suck at operating equipment. He goes, how about you hop into a dump truck? So I'm like, all right. So I hopped into the dump truck. They hooked up a pintle hitch flatbed trailer to the back of a dump truck, and they put a little D3 dozer on it. He said, go to the gravel pit, get a load of gravel, and then take the truck, trailer, and dozer to this job site. And I was like, okay. And I hopped in and I went, ooh, the Army only has automatics. And so I yelled at him. I looked at him. I go, hey, is reverse to the left and down or to the right and up? And he looked at me and goes, are you shitting me? I went, no, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. Pulled out onto a U.S. highway, pulling a dozer, and I killed it right broadside across both lanes of the U.S. highway. So I think that first trip took me about an hour and a half to drive 7 miles. And I don't know, I've worked in warehouses, I've installed satellite TVs, I worked full time for the National Guard in an office, and this just seems to suck a little less than anything else I've ever done. And so it's one thing I've just kind of kept with.
So then, what did you do from there as far as?
We came up to fall and everybody started getting laid off. And I said, well, what do you mean we're getting laid off? And he goes, well, I don't have work for you in the wintertime. And I had a panic attack. I mean, he kind of farmed me out. I stayed as a truck driver, hauling dirt, belly dump. He farmed us out to some farmers towards fall to start hauling beets, sugar beets. And then all of a sudden it came time to lay us off. And I was like, I can't afford to be laid off. I'd never had unemployment. I didn't know. I was 18 or 19 at the time. So I didn't even understand what unemployment was, but I know I didn't save any of the money that I made all summer long. So I wasn't to make it. From there, I lived right across from the Pepsi distribution center, and turned out they were looking for a route driver. And I started hauling pop for about a year to grocery stores and convenience stores. And then beer delivery. I had a lot of beer on my route that I had to do for bars. And it was backbreaking, up at 2 a.m, fighting through snow, freezing your butt off. But I made it a year. And then early on, I had a lot of quit in me. You could have looked at me wrong and I'd say, no, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. I'll see you later. But that Pepsi place, that was probably my longest run. And I finally said, oh, driving's not for me. I ended up taking a full-time job with the National Guard, and we deployed in 2009, 2010 to Iraq. And when I got back, I got sent to Smyrna, Tennessee, to a training site. It was a month long to reclass. And when I drove down there with my pickup, and the entire time I'm like, I think I could do this. This could be fun. So while I was down there, I was going through help wanted ads, and I found a truck driving job. It's where we hauled soybean seed corn, stuff like that. And it was kind of my first little taste of regional. I tore up a lot of stuff. I dropped a 52-foot dry van into a drainage ditch once. I learned the hard way that when the wintertime brakes freeze, it's not just that your truck's underpowered and you just got to shift faster. Your brakes are probably locked up and you're smoking a set of tires off the trailer. I made it about 3.5 miles before I realized that there was a fire behind me, and I got pulled over, and I had to call the boss at 3 a.m. and tell him that his trailer is on fire. And he's like, what? I go, yeah, man, it's smoking. I don't know what the hell. I got out. I'm like, oh, your tires are square. He's like, don't move. He showed up at 3 a.m. He's like, you got to hit the inside of the drum. Kind of like how I want to hit you in the forehead with his hammer. You got to hit the drum like that. So then he gets me freed up, and he gets me turned around. He goes, meet me at the tire store. And as I'm turning into the tire store, I forgot I had a headache rack on with the dry van. I snapped the airlines off the back and got broadside across the U.S. highway again, and dead in the water because I can't move now because it just blew my glad hand right off the back of my trailer or the front of my trailer. I got to tell you, he had a lot of patience with me.
Right.
That same guy, he goes, all right, we're going to have you preload a hopper bottom. And then in the morning you take off and you bring it about 3.5 hours down the road. And I made the full 3.5 hours, got over the jump auger, opened up the hopper, and nothing came out. And my dumb ass, I'm like, oh, the soybean seeds are frozen up in there. So I crawl underneath there. No, it's an empty trailer. I grabbed the wrong trailer, and I call the guy. I'm like, man, you're not going to believe what I just did. He goes, I didn't at first, but I realized real quick you are that dumb. I'm like, oh God. What do we do? He goes, you come home. And I go, well, what do you want me to do tomorrow? I don't know if I got anything for you to do tomorrow, man. But he realized I was a moron, and he took me under his wing, and pretty much everywhere I went, he went, and I spent I don't know how many hours in his passenger seat at the end of the night, showing me how to do the logbook the right way, and then showing me the real way to do the paper logbook, and it kind of all flowered from there. Moved on to hauling pneumatic tank, and that's in the wintertime. Instead of laying me off, they put me under RGN, and I started doing oversized stuff, and I kind of fell in love with the oversized, and been doing this for about 13 years now. 13, 14 years I've been doing double drop.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, listen, trucking's going to have its moments, right? But
He's still
you hang around long. Yeah, I mean,
15 years into it, you do something every once in a while, you're like, oh. The big thing is when you learn that you screwed up, you learn from that mistake and you do not repeat it again. And some of them dumb little mistakes, you get complacent and you end up doing it again. You're like, I'm a moron. But you get experience just teaches you how to hide those screw ups a little bit better, I think.
Right. Yeah. You've got a list of excuses at that point and you can explain it away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just the repetitive, the repetitive stuff that you've done 1,000 times, but something happens in the middle of you doing it. The phone rings, or you forgot a glove or something, right? And you got to go back, and you threw the whole process in your head off, and now you're lost, and you realize you missed some steps.
Yeah. See, and I pull a mechanical RGN, and it's like it just doesn't have hydraulics. I'm the one doing all the work. And there's a lot of steps to detaching. You got to drive out from underneath it, flip your rings off, take your airlines off. And I tell everybody that first starts, get a process. There's some steps that have to be in order. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. But I mean, you can do little things differently from the next guy. But you need to figure out your system and stay to it routine after routine every day. This time I'm going to pull the fifth wheel first. And then next time I'm going to take the airlines off first. I always tell them, you're going to screw up and something bad's going to happen. And eventually you can get into this rhythm where you're not even thinking about what you're doing, and bam, you're detached in like 5 seconds. But then is when it gets scary, because then all of a sudden you're doing all this stuff and you're not thinking. And then Farmer John comes up behind you all giddy because his brand new tractor just showed up, and you're like, oh yeah, it looks pretty good. And you stop, you're like, oh, where was I? And then you jump in the truck, and there you go with your airlines flying across the yard, and then you're sitting there like an idiot because you just ripped your airlines off again. Well, where did you start out at? I mean, you started with the reefer, right? Were you always reefer?
No. I started off. I started off 16 in Minnesota. You can get your farmer's permit, right? You can get a Class B license, and you can drive agricultural stuff, right? So of course, peas, sweet corn, sugar beets, $3 an hour, delivering pizzas or whatever, or $7-8 an hour hauling peas and sweet corn was a way better deal, right?
Was that for the same guy across the road?
No, my guy was up the road to the east a ways. My first one.
Oh, I know that one. Okay.
Well, after 3 summers of doing that, like, you pretty much work for every farmer because,
Right.
Same thing as you, right? Stupid stunt, get stuck, burn something out. He thinks you're an idiot. You're fired. Drive to the next farm. Hey, man, I'm a free agent. What's going on? Yeah, never said that smoke over from the other guy's farm. Never mind that.
You got any experience? Man, I'm the best driver you ever seen.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a trucking family, but
right.
it's not like I drove much. I puttered around yards and stuff like that. And then, like your experience with the military truck as opposed to another truck, like, the diversity of how to operate a truck is pretty significant when you've only driven one truck.
Right.
And and only been, in first gear. And then you go past your written test, and now all of a sudden I show up on Farmer John's doorstep saying, I saw your ad in the paper and I'm ready to be a trucker. He's like, you know what you're doing? And like, yep. And he's like, okay, well, the truck's over there. Here's the keys. The field is down the road 5 miles. Yeah, they're waiting on you. And you just jump in and go. And as soon as you jump in the cab of the 1970 International, whatever it was, named Maranatha, you look around and go, half the buttons don't even have labels. Maybe none of them did. If they did have a label, they're worn off by now. Yeah, I don't know why there's an extra knob on the shift lever, because I've never seen one of those before. And you fire, like, I don't know, which button do I press to even start the thing? And so...
and they always say, like, military grade is a kind of a joke to any veteran, because if you ever saw what military grade is, it's not very good. Military training is the same way. The military does a great job making you memorize how many quarts of oil something holds, or how many quarts of antifreeze, and what the nomenclature number is for that, so you can order it. The operating side of it, they're more like, that'll buff out later. You'll figure that out. Don't worry. So when somebody's standing at your doorstep, like, I got military training on how to do that, you might as well just say you don't know anything.
Good note for all the recruiters out there, Mitch. We have some follow-up questions.
That guy could grease the hell out of that thing, but he might not be able to drive it as well as you think he is.
Yeah, so that's how I got started, driving straight trucks. And then sugar beet season came around, and I had turned 18, so I could drive combination vehicles. And next thing you know, you're doing that. And from there, the addiction begins.
Yeah.
And then, bought my own truck when I was 19, and then started wandering around the state until I was about 20. And then I started wandering around the country a little early. And then was over the road. But yeah, I jumped into reefers. As soon as I went out of state, vans, it was a lot of, inside Minnesota, a lot of seed corn, a lot of, stuff like that, chemicals, deliveries like that. But yeah, I worked for a couple farmers, and I mean, you never knew what you were getting into with a farmer, and it just all depended on what he was doing. Right. I ended up working for one farmer who had like a dairy operation, pretty significant dairy operation. And so, I mean, we would be hauling hay, we'd be hauling rocks, we'd be hauling cattle down to Worthington, down to the processing plant. So you just never knew what you were going to get into. And, all of it was no experience. You'll figure it out, if you open the door, and the cows will come out eventually, stuff like that.
So you didn't even dip your toes in it, right? At 19, you're like, I'm going out of the field and right into my own truck. You didn't even...
I drove
waters.
No, I bought one of the trucks I was driving for the farmer at that time. And then I started hauling sugar beets to the processing plant from the piling stations. But yeah, you got paid flat rate, depending on how far the load was, and you just drove like a lunatic, and not a lot of, let's say, oversight as far as how many loads you could haul or how many hours a day you worked. And next thing you know, you got enough scratched together for a down payment, and you buy a truck, $10,000 truck, and then after that, I had a $7,000 reefer trailer. So
see, and that's the thing, though. Like, what year was that then? That would be late.
I mean, mid 90s.
So yeah, so you could, back in the day when you could have bought a reasonably reliable truck for almost nothing. I mean, it's crazy. Like, you fast forward to 2025 and somebody's looking at a truck with 500,000 miles on it. It's a $80,000 truck, and it's probably knocking on death's door already. It's nuts what's happened in the 2 decades or whatever.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I saw a guy, he posted on Facebook the other day. He said, I've been saving up. I got $20,000 to get started. I have enough to become an owner operator. And everybody was like,
you got enough for the fuel.
What? Yeah, you got a few weeks worth of fuel.
Yeah, that's the wild thing. I mean, my wife probably would have preferred me just to jump in at 19 and buy my own truck, but I was the one that sat there for probably 13 years to go, one day I'm going to own my own truck. I'm going to own my own truck. And then it's by the time I turn 30, I will be an owner operator. And all of a sudden it's like midnight the night before my 30th birthday. And my wife's like, you going to do it or shut up? I was like, you serious? And she's like, either buy a truck tomorrow or shut your face. I'm done hearing about it. And I'm like, oh, well, all right, we're going to do it.
There you go. Put on your good jeans and step in the store.
And I was even, I mean, I got a 07 386P. It looked respectable, but I mean, there was nothing impressive about it. It was a 10-speed transmission and it did the job, but I was able to get it for, I think it was like there's still $20,000. And, you know, you got to find the right banker to hear you out on your crazy idea.
Right.
Which is always crazy too, because you're like, they want to know how much you're going to make. And you're like, I don't know. It depends on the year. Well, no, I need a number. Yeah, I'd like a number too.
You know, anybody's got that number?
6 months from now, you might be buying back a truck with a blown motor and me crying on your doorstep saying, hey, man, sorry, I was wrong.
You think back, I mean, just the price difference is so crazy to think about, right? Just the trucks, you know, diesel fuel is under $1 a gallon. You're buying a used truck at that point. The truck was probably 8 years old, had 1 million miles on it. And the last few years on that truck's life had been around farm stuff. So rough, you know.
Rough, hard work. Yeah.
Rough usage. Yeah. You know, in and out of fields and in mud and every other thing. And so, yeah, you know, I mean, I traded that truck in. You know, I drove that truck for a couple years. You know, almost 2 years. And after that many miles in a machine, like you knew it like the back of your hand. And I traded it in. I could feel it, right? I could feel it in the truck. Like, it's time, right? It's just telling me you should go. And I traded it in and like somebody else bought it from the dealership and 2 weeks later blew the rear end. And there you go.
You just get that weird little tickle in your butthole and you're going down the road at 65. You're like, that wasn't there 3 weeks ago. We got to figure something out.
Yeah, and it's little stuff, right? Like, you know, you have to even just think about it. And you're like, why does this shift lever vibrate just a little bit different?
Yeah.
What's going on?
It does a second cough when it's cranking over in the morning. I don't like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, there's just a ton of good luck and good fortune that goes into being successful when you're early on and you're strapped for cash and you're happy to have enough fuel and enough money in your pocket to buy fuel to idle all night instead of freezing, because you might not have enough fuel.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much to do with luck. I mean, even just being in the right spot for the right load. I mean, you could get offered, you know, like now today with my world, you could get offered 3 different loads, and it's you could take that top paying load that sends you to the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden now you're like, ooh, I should have took the medium paying load because it probably would have got me a better backhaul. And sometimes you get to take the best paying load and it sends you to another great paying load. And it's weird how it's just kind of all luck. There's some skill and brain involved to it. But the best advice I had was that first driving job that I had, where he kind of grabbed me by the back of the neck and said, you know, you just kind of need to shut your brain off. Just drive the damn truck. And I think a lot of guys, and I'm guilty of it too, start overthinking so much stuff. Like, oh, I can't take this load because it goes to the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, and there's nothing to get me out of there. And sometimes you just got to take the load and go and see what happens.
Yeah. That's what I missed about the early days when I went over the road was just, you know, the guy running, he had about 10, 11, maybe 12 trucks. And during the wintertime when there's no agricultural stuff, you know, you'd go run over the road and you know, we just wandered, right? He'd get a fax in the morning of a bunch of loads, like 7 pages of loads. And
I'm not that.
You know, you highlight which state, you know, where do I got drivers? And then you'd call them up with my payphone and they're like, what are we doing next, boss? Like, you just wander around. Next thing you know, you're in the middle of nowhere and, you know, just wandered. You know, after a while, you know, then it becomes a little more about the money, right? You're just, you get it, or it's something that you like to do, right? Like I ran a lot of East Coast, Midwest to East Coast. I tried the West Coast a couple times, didn't like it. It's too far. I like the East Coast, you know, you can screw around for, it's usually let's say you load on Monday, deliver on Wednesday, back on Friday,
Right.
tight turn, so you can, back then before ELDs got involved, you could, you can work hard on the first day, or you can work hard on the second day, or you can spread it out over 2 days,
Right.
when do you want to work and how hard do you want to work at it? Right. And California was too much. It's like, man, I work both days. It's going to be Thursday, it's going to be load on Monday, deliver in California on Thursday, and then you're back delivering them. It never felt clean to me, right? It's like, these trips just take a little too long. I gotta go back to the East Coast.
Well, and that's the funny thing too, is, I mean, I do a lot to the Port of Baltimore, and I prefer the Port of Baltimore. And it's just the preferences with drivers and what they do and what they don't do. And you can find half of people that will turn their nose to you and go, "You go to Baltimore all the time? Why would you do that?" Like, I want to go to Oregon and Washington State. I'd rather go out that way. And to me, I've been burned every time I go out to Oregon or Washington State. I always look at the reload, and like you said, the timing. I could leave Sunday morning and be back Friday afternoon going out to Baltimore and have one hell of a week. And some guys just prefer the West or California, and thank God, obviously. I mean, otherwise everybody'd be going to one part of the country and nothing would get moved to the other part of the country. But it always cracks me up.
Well, same with like how you do it too. Like when I first started heading east, I was a snob. Like I wasn't getting on the toll road. I'm not paying these fools this, Ohio Turnpike. I'm gonna run US 6, and then I'm gonna run it down across 30 and come out the other side and dodge the whole thing, Indiana and Ohio. And then a year later, you're like, screw that. I'm just putting it on the turnpike, going. I'm not stopping at every town, 900 stoplights.
You want to watch me, my worst week ever. You'll see me grumpier than hell. Is when I got to take 20 all the way across through to Fort Wayne to Indiana, and to miss all the toll roads because you're oversized. By the time I get unloaded and I get a legal load or something coming home, take my money. I'm on that toll road. And I'm not getting off until I run out of the toll. It's
Yep.
Yeah. There's so many people that are like, "Oh, such nice scenery when you take the 2 lanes and the back roads and stuff like that." All I picture is stupid little towns that I got to kick my cruise off for. I'd rather just get on the interstate and lock my cruise and not think for a day and a half.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if there's one thing to get, and part of the reason for having these conversations about how people got into trucking and some of this is, there's a million ways to do this thing.
Oh yeah.
You just got to play around and figure out what thing does it for you, and realize, what you may think, you may be the guy today who says, what, I just love going to the East Coast. I love going to Jersey, in your case, Baltimore. And what, a year from now, you could be like, I hate this. I never want to see Jersey again. I'm going to California. Like, It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to get sick of some of this stuff and try something different.
That's what I like about what I do. I mean, I can get on a steady diet of one thing, and then all of a sudden, what? We're going to Nebraska to switch things up, see what Nebraska or Texas or, I mean, right now the economy is so wonky. You're kind of taking what you can get, but it's nice to be able to just go, I'm going to go west a little bit, or I'm going to go, stay in Tornado Alley this week. That's to me, I see the upside to having like a dedicated run, where you run the same thing every day, every week, every year. But I don't know if I could do that. I don't have that mindset to just, I'd like the idea going, I need to leave at 8 a.m. I can get to here, I can get to there, and I'm unloading, and then do it in reverse. It's the same thing. There's a plus side to the steady or the repetitiveness, but I'd get bored way too fast. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something about the chaos that keeps it interesting, right?
Yeah.
Well, man, I appreciate you jumping on the podcast with us. Great to hear from you, and don't be a stranger. We'll catch you on the flip side at some point and get you back on here and talk about a different topic.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll be hearing more from Danger Dave throughout the story of this podcast. There is a choice we have to make here, which is, like, if you don't reach out to me enjoying the podcast, then I'm just going to bring Danger Dave back because he entertains me and he's got funny stories. So if you get tired of Danger Dave, call us and you can be on the podcast. Let's talk a little bit about our air quote sponsors for the show. First up, I want to talk about an organization that is a nonprofit for the trucking industry. It's an organization called Truckers Final Mile. They help families when truckers pass away on the road and help get them and their belongings back home after they pass away to their families so they can be laid to rest. It happens. You know, I've been through a few different experiences where it has happened to people that I know or that I worked with. I'm sorry to say that at times trucking companies do not always do what they should do. And this is where an organization like Truckers Final Mile comes in. It's veteran owned. Go to their website, go to their social medias, support them if it's in your means and in your heart to do so. I do because I care about it and I want to make sure truckers get home to their families so they can be laid to rest. Next up, it is February when I'm recording this. It is tax season. Truckers, you know your math doesn't math very well, especially now since ELDs got into the picture. Some of us could do a little bit of math when it came to doing our recaps and understanding how many hours we had left. We've had ELDs for a while now. Some of our math skills are rusty, so hire a professional to help you with your taxes. Jackie she's got a hazmat endorsement. And now she's licensed with the IRS to do people's taxes. She does my family's taxes, my business taxes. She understands trucking. She understands deductions and how to maximize all the advantages that the tax code allows for your business, for your personal taxes. She's affordable. She meets you where you are when it comes to cost. She's not just in it to rack up a bunch of fees. She's a great person. Reach out to Tax Mommy Jackie and get your tax work done through her. Finally, let me give a quick endorsement to my friends over at True TMS. If you're a small fleet, especially if you're in the tanker business, they make a TMS, transportation management system. Keep track of all your loads, your billing, driver app to send load information, collect documents, all the good stuff that comes with a TMS. Now, if you're looking for a TMS, consider giving a look to True TMS. I've known some folks over there for a long time before there was even a True TMS. They know trucking. They care about trucking and the trucking industry. You'll see them at some of the shows. George goes out to the Trucker Jamboree. They care about our business. And they're interested in selling a product that makes a difference to people. So give them a look, www.truetms.com. So check them out if that's a good fit for you. All right. So I think that's a wrap on the first episode of the podcast. Send me your feedback. Don't be bashful. Join our social media page. Click follow, subscribe on your podcast. The podcast will be growing as far as which platforms it's available on. You know, the first episodes will get out there on YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Once I get through the hassle of Apple Podcasts, that'll help distribute it to other channels. Spread the word. We'll throw some clips out there of the podcast. If anything's funny, share it in the other trucker groups. Spread the word. Reach out and, if you want to be on the show, if you want to tell your story, if you just want to tell your story, and you don't want it to be on the show, but you want to tell somebody, I am always open for entertaining stories. So reach out. If you're stumped, if you need advice, message us. Between the crew of people that are behind the scenes helping me create a podcast, we've got hundreds of years of trucking experience in a variety of different areas of trucking. So if you've got a question, if you're stumped, you want some advice, reach out. We're happy to share what knowledge we have, any connections we might have to people in the business who can help answer it. We can answer a lot of the questions ourselves, but if we get stumped, we're happy to reach out and make connections too. This is, like I said at the beginning, this is about community. This is about helping one another staying connected with one another, sharing our stories with one another, and looking after one another. So look after each other, be kind, and we'll see you on the next podcast. Thanks for listening.